were DOG and its resources pulled from the first Fort Hood shooting based upon a political decision to classify that shooting as workforce violence? Who made the call to treat the 2009 shooting as a workplace violence as opposed to an act of terror? Being a fine lawyer, I'm sure you're very familiar, since you're fighting our terrorism in this country, with the definition of terrorism under 18 U.S.C. 2331, 2332 A and B. Did the DOJ discuss with the DOD the classification of the event in 2009 as to whether or not it was going to be an act of terrorism? It seems implausible that two of our top agencies would not have a conversation about that. I know that ultimately you made a statement that this was a DOD classification. I'm asking you, though, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, would you classify the 2009 Fort Hood shooting as a terrorist act or terrorism as defined in 18 U.S.C.? Had the 2009 Fort Hood shooting occurred at DOJ headquarters and therefore fully under your jurisdiction, would you have categorized that as a workplace violence event? And finally, how have jurisdictional lines between the FBI, CID, and other law enforcement agencies been defined when criminal acts are taking place on a military post? And in light of the recent base shootings, should we clarify investigating these responsibilities?
Well, with regard
Lots of questions, sorry.
The White House confirmed, I guess, on Wednesday night that the Department of Defense was in the lead with regard to the investigation. It doesn't mean, however, that the FBI will not try to assist in any way that we can with regard to for our forensic capabilities, agents. We will assist in that regard. With regard to that workplace violence designation, that was based on a DOD assessment. I understand your concerns, but I would refer you to the Department of Defense for questions. And I think, interestingly, Chairman Wolf and Ranking Member Fattah appropriately raised these questions back with DOD in a May 2013 letter, which acknowledged, and I quote, that the Department of Defense and Army have designated the attack by Major Nidal Hassan as, quote, workplace violence. It was something that determination was made by DOD as opposed to DOJ.
Would you mind answering my question that I asked you? Had it happened at your headquarters, how would you have classified it?
Well, I mean, again, you have to look at the totality of, the circumstances and understand.
Well, for the sake of the question, assume the exact scenario that happened at Fort Hood in 2009. You have a person of Islamic descent screaming Allah Akbar. He was a member of your staff, and he starts shooting, and he wounds some 30 people and kills 13 or 14 of them. Would you still take that as a position that it was a workforce violence act and therefore not under our terrorism statutes?
Well, again, it would depend. These are fact-specific things, and so it would depend on what the person's motivation was. Was the person a follower of Alaki, as Hassan was? Was the motive for the shooting an attempt to follow the teachings of Alaki, as opposed to some kind of workplace problems that you had with your colleagues? Yeah, I could see how that would be classified as a terrorist incident if it had happened at the Justice Department. But again, it depends on the facts situation, and I don't know all the factors that went into the DOD designation. That was not one that we made. It was one that they made. I'm not familiar with all that they did.
I agree with you. Facts are important. That's why finding out about facts are important. But I just happen to have a copy of the code here. You don't have to be involved with the Islamic situation at all to commit terrorism in the United States, do you?
No.
No, it's not. It's a defined statutory thing. It's pretty simple. Involves acts dangerous to human life that violate federal or state law, appear intended to, 1, intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3, to affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Doesn't say anything about a relationship with, now, international terrorism does have a definition of somebody outside the country being involved. But that, I just first asked you, would you consider it a terrorist act if it happened in your office?
Again, I don't know, I'm not as familiar with what happened at Fort Hood the first time as the people at DOD were, and I'm a little hesitant to, in essence, second-guess the assessment that they made.
I'm not asking you to second-guess their assessment. I'm concerned, if you're the top enforcement officer for the United States of America, and there's a clear definition in the U.S. Code, and it's expanded, I didn't read all of it, but that's a clear definition of the U.S. Code. And if somebody started shooting people in your office, multiple people screaming out some kind of political comment, I don't care what it is, would you have automatically said, well, this unfortunately is a civil workforce violence problem we've got here?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, it certainly could be a terrorist act. It would depend, again, on the facts. And those are the kinds of determinations that we would have to make.
And the truth is, if it happened, it really wouldn't be of any consequences as it related to your office, because the term workforce violence has consequences under the DOJ, but it doesn't have consequences. And terrorism, the term terrorism has consequences, I'm sorry, DOD. Both those terms, what it's called, has major consequences on the lives of those involved. And that's the real issue I have been concerned about since day one. A simple declaration by the administration or the Army, public or private, that says it is a workforce violence act takes 24 people and puts them in a category where they don't get certain benefits from the federal government as a result of them serving their country and being shot and killed or injured. That's why I'm asking this question. Because I think we ought to at least acknowledge that there's a clear definition under federal law. And by the way, Texas has one under state law that says, I think clearly that the act was terrorism. Whether international or not is up for dispute. The act was terrorism. And so that's why I ask you for your help. I understand you don't want to answer the question, and that's fine.